The sun was a brilliant high gold coin in the vast Michigan sky, its heat tempered by the gentle sigh of the wind through the pine trees surrounding Crystal Lake. For a 12-year-old Sarah, this annual summer pilgrimage to her grandparents' old cabin was the highlight of her year. This year, however, was different. It was the first trip since her dad, Mark, had moved out. The silence in the car during the 7-hour drive from Chicago had been a heavy, tangible thing, broken only by the hum of the tires and the soft murmur of the radio. Her mom, Lisa, had tried so hard to be cheerful, pointing out familiar landmarks as they drew closer. "Look, Sarah, the big red barn. We're almost there." But Sarah could see the strain around her mother's eyes, the way her smile didn't quite reach them. The cabin, once a place of boisterous family barbecues and her father's terrible fishing stories, now felt too big, too quiet. That first afternoon, the stillness became unbearable. "Let's go for a swim," Lisa suggested, her voice overly bright. "Shake off the drive." Sarah agreed, and they changed into their swimsuits in the musty-smelling bedroom they were sharing. The path to the lake was familiar, a carpet of soft pine needles under their bare feet. The water was shockingly cold at first, 1,000 icy needles pricking their skin, but then it became invigorating. They swam out to the old wooden dock, its planks warm and weathered under the sun. For a while, they just floated on their backs, looking up at the clouds. Sarah felt a flicker of the old happiness. It was just her and Mom, like it used to be before the arguments, before the silence. They played a game of Marco Polo, Lisa's voice echoing Marco. Across the still water, Sarah's answering Polo, ringing with genuine laughter. "I'm getting cold," Sarah said after her teeth began to chatter. "Race you back?" They swam for the shore, Lisa letting Sarah win by a hand's breadth. They emerged from the water, dripping and breathless, and collapsed onto the large, worn quilt Lisa had spread on the grassy bank. The sun baked their skin, and the world was peaceful, filled only with the sounds of lapping water and chirping crickets. Lisa rolled onto her side, propping her head on her hand. Her expression was soft, but there was a deep, unsettling sadness in her gaze as she looked at Sarah. "My sweet girl," she murmured, her voice thick with an emotion Sarah couldn't name. "You're growing up so fast." She reached out and brushed a wet strand of hair from Sarah's forehead. Her touch was gentle, but it felt different, more intense. Sarah smiled, a little uncertainly. "I'm okay, Mom." "I know, honey. I need you to know how much I love you." Lisa's hand moved from Sarah's hair to her cheek, her thumb stroking her skin. It was a motherly gesture, one Sarah had known her whole life, but the intensity behind it was new and confusing. The air, once light and full of summer, suddenly felt heavy. Then Lisa's hand moved again. It slid from Sarah's cheek, down her neck, over her shoulder. And then, with a sudden, shocking swiftness, it dipped under the waistband of Sarah's swimsuit bottoms and into her pants. The world stopped. Sarah froze. Every muscle in her body locked. Her brain screamed, a silent, internal siren of pure wrongness. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. The touch was brief, a fleeting, invasive pressure, but it sent a seismic shock through her entire being. It was a violation that shattered the sanctity of the moment, of their relationship, of everything she thought was safe. Just as suddenly as it had happened, Lisa pulled her hand back. She didn't look shocked or apologetic. Instead, her face was a mask of strange, wistful longing. I remember when you were so small," she whispered, her voice dreamy and distant. For Sarah, those words were meaningless noise. Her skin was crawling. The sun no longer felt warm. It felt exposing. The beautiful lake was no longer inviting. It was a vast, cold witness to something terrible. She felt a nausea that had nothing to do with the water she'd swallowed. She scrambled to her feet, her limbs clumsy and uncoordinated. I'm going to get a towel, she stammered, her voice a thin, reedy thing she didn't recognize. Lisa simply nodded, already lying back down and closing her eyes as if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't just fractured her daughter's world, thought Sarah ran. She didn't walk. She ran up the path to the cabin, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She slammed the screen door behind her and stood in the middle of the living room, trembling, hugging herself. The familiar, cozy space now felt alien and threatening. What just happened? Did she imagine it? The phantom sensation of her mother's hand was still there, a brand of shame and confusion on her skin. She couldn't stay in the cabin. She changed into shorts and a t-shirt with frantic, jerky movements and fled outside, wandering down the dusty gravel road without any destination in mind. Her mind was a chaotic whirlwind. Was it an accident? But the movement had been so deliberate. Did it mean what I think it meant? She was 12. She knew about inappropriate touch from school programs, but those were always about strangers, monsters, and dark alleys. Not mom's, not her own mom on a sunny day by the lake. The person she desperately wanted to call was her dad. But how could she possibly form the words? "Hey, Dad," Mom put her hand in my pants today. The sentence was too monstrous to speak aloud, and a treacherous part of her worried he wouldn't believe her, or worse, that it would be her fault for misunderstanding. She ended up sitting on a fallen log by the side of the road for over an hour, watching the light change as the afternoon deepened. When she finally forced herself to walk back to the cabin, her stomach was a hard knot of dread. Lisa was in the kitchen, humming and making spaghetti as if it were any other evening. "There you are. I was wondering where you'd wandered off to. Dinner's almost ready." Sarah could only nod, her throat too tight to speak. She set the table in silence, her movements robotic. The air between them was thick with the unspoken. During dinner, Lisa chattered about plans for the next day. Maybe they could go into town, visit the little ice cream parlor. Sarah pushed her food around her plate, offering only monosyllabic replies. "Are you feeling okay, honey?" Lisa asked, her brow furrowed with what looked like genuine concern. "You've been quiet since we swam." The casual reference to the swim made Sarah flinch. She looked up at her mother, really looked at her. She saw the woman who had read her bedtime stories, who had bandaged her scraped knees, who had held her when she cried about a failed test. But now, superimposed over that familiar face, was the woman with the distant, longing eyes and the violating hand. "I'm just tired," Sarah managed to whisper that night. Lying in the bed next to her mother, Sarah pretended to be asleep. She lay rigid, staring into the darkness, listening to Lisa's even breathing. The space between them and the double bed felt like a mile-wide chasm. Every rustle of the sheets, every shift of her mother's body sent a fresh jolt of anxiety through her. The trust that had been the bedrock of her life had crumbled into dust. The rest of the week was a slow, painful exercise in pretending. Sarah avoided being alone with her mother. She invented headaches to get out of activities. She spent hours reading on the porch, the book lying unopened in her lap. Lisa's cheerful facade began to wear thin, replaced by a puzzled irritation. She seemed to have no memory of the incident by the lake, or had rationalized it into something benign in her own mind. This, to Sarah, was almost as terrifying as the act itself. When they finally packed the car to drive back to Chicago, Sarah felt a wave of relief so powerful it made her weak. The cabin, once a sanctuary, was now a place of horror back in her own room in the apartment she now shared with her mom. The silence felt different. It wasn't just the silence of her father's absence. It was the silence of her secret. It festered inside her. She started having trouble sleeping. Her grades began to slip. She jumped at sudden noises. The breaking point came a month later. Lisa tried to give her a goodnight hug, and Sarah recoiled violently, stumbling back against her desk. "Don't touch me." She cried out, her voice sharp with panic. Lisa's face fell, a mixture of hurt and confusion. Sarah, what on earth is the matter with you lately? The dam broke. The words, bottled up for weeks, came pouring out in a torrent of tears and choked sobs. At the lake, you put your hand in my pants. You touched me. The color drained from Lisa's face. For a long moment, she just stood there, stunned. Then, to Sarah's utter shock, her mother's face crumpled and she began to cry, deep, racking sobs that shook her whole body. She sank onto Sarah's bed, burying her face in her hands. Oh my God, Sarah? My baby girl? No, she wept. No, no, no. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red and shattered. I am so sorry. That is not what you think. That is not what it was. She took a ragged breath. I was lost. Your father leaving. I felt so abandoned, so alone. I felt like I was losing everything. And you were there, so strong and beautiful. And you were growing up, and I felt you slipping away too. It was a moment of complete insanity. I wasn't seeing you as my daughter in that second. I was seeing you as a part of my life that I was desperate to hold on to control. It was a terrible, sick, confused impulse born of my own pain. It was not that. I would never, ever. She was crying too hard to continue. Sarah listened, her own tears slowing. Her mother's explanation was messy, complicated, and didn't erase the violation. The act was still wrong. The hurt